Greetings and salutations. I hope everyone's having themselves a mighty fine day. It is Kubera time. Like the video, subscribe, and hit the bell so you can stay notified. And today I want to talk about something that I think Currygom is really good at. This is not something I would say is unique to Currygom. There is other authors that I really like that do this, but I want to use Kubera as the framework to speak about the art of conversation. What do I mean by that? Making dialogue legitimately engaging, meaningful, purposeful, and something that we as an audience, as a reader or watcher, whatever the case is, we actually look forward to. Because I would argue this, in most cases, for most mediums, for most people, not everyone, action and sex is technically what sells. It is. People need that adrenaline rush. They need action sequences, fights, guns, whatever the case may be, to kind of get themselves involved and enthralled in the series. Or they need that ever so often, sporadically, something action-based. Whether, like, for example, Shokugeki no Shoma, like Food Wars, is not an action series, but the action portions of it is the cooking. Right, so when the characters are cooking and they eat it, and they're like, "Oh yes, kimochi," whatever. like that's like the action part. For a sports series and sports manga, it's the games, the basketball. You know, seeing Ayomine go crazy, seeing Raichi hit it out the park. Like that is the action portions. With Kubera, it has a lot more combat nowadays. Absolutely. However, it's still not the draw. I would actually say a lot of the conversation that these characters have, that's really what pulls us in. So let's talk about it.
Y'all talking time to tick away. You ain't clocking hours on the day. All that watch is stopping what you claim. Dollar crosses Rio got me name. Hoping God just get me out this brain.
I'm not sure if a lot of you have noticed it, because I don't know how long a lot of you have been, a fan of storytelling or manga, webtoons, whatever the case is. But at some point, there was this weird kind of paradigm shift in the way that we discuss media and consume it and are fans of it. And one thing that I noticed with a lot of writing nowadays, and I'm not saying this never happened prior. I'm not on my old man yelling cloud gimmick today, guys. I'm not doing that. But I would argue this. A lot of conversations in the current stories that I read, comics, manga, webtoons, watching anime, whatever, the characters themselves actually just exposit story details to us, the audience. They kind of just speak about the narrative and speak about which varying plot points and plot devices they might have to engage with next. So I'm going to give you an example. Let's say the central plot of my story is called Sharpie, right? I don't know. We're gonna call it Sharpie, right? And the central plot is that I have to find some type of item in order to locate the bad guy, and then take out the bad guy, because the bad guy has, I don't know, some ancient death ray that can destroy everything, right? Here's how the characters would actually kind of speak. We have to go get the MacGuffin. What do you mean we have to go collect the MacGuffin? Well, in order to find the bad guy, we must find this plot device, which will lead us to stop him. Like, they actually are kind of just telling us implicitly, like, what's going to happen. They're talking about literal story details. And I actually don't think that's very interesting. It can be, and sometimes I understand you gotta do that. For example, Tower of God is a series where it's kind of an isekai. So as the reader, you are just as blind as Bam. So when you're getting all the exposition from Yuri and Evan and whatnot, it makes sense because you're kind of like a frog out of the well. Like, you don't know anything. So you gotta get that kind of info dump. There's times and places where it works. I don't want to be lost on anybody. But Currygom, there's something very, very, very important that I think a lot of authors don't do. And she keeps the personalities of the characters while they're having conversations. And she starts to bleed in slowly the changes that the characters go through as they progress. The characters in Kubera are not static. They're dynamic. They're constantly evolving and changing and feeling different emotions, and maybe having some of their ideals, their methods changed based on what's happening in the world. They don't just stay the same from chapter 1 to chapter 500 or whatever. Now, there's static characters are not inherently a good or bad thing, but her characters change. Brilith, for example, We saw a certain way in season 3. There was a change. Ran, there was a change. Maruna, there was a change. And it is very subtle, but if you actually pay attention, she starts to bleed in some of the changing personalities of those characters ever like slowly but surely. Think about Ran. Ran is kind of goofy, right? So even though we might be having a serious conversation like, hey Ran, we're getting through the water channel, you don't calculate, blah blah blah, everyone, the way that they speak is in line with their personality, their ideals, their goals, and all those things. Like, it's clearly present to the point where I argue I can remove the pictures and you would know who's talking. You would know who's having a conversation, or you'd have an idea like, this is an Asha type line, this is a Lise type line, this is a Maruna type line. Like, I would argue you could do that. That's how well she has their personalities come out during conversation. Please like the video, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so the goals to the 13-month series does not get you, and you can stay notified. Also, check my description for all links like the intros and outros to the songs that I use in these videos. Follow me at Young Paperwork on Twitter, and definitely follow the Twitch. Now, back to the video. Secondly, because Currygom is so good at making everything meaningful, everything is done with intention, everything is done with purpose. There is very little information that I have in Kubera that feels useless to me. Like, at some point, the fact that I hung on to one little line here or some little line over there, it might come full circle or just have some type of meaning and payoff at some point. And as a result of that, conversations become a lot more interesting because as a reader, you want to kind of figure it out. You want to be the one that's like, yo, back in season 2 chapter 53 when Asha said this, it ties back. Like, all of that stuff is interconnected, and as a result, as a reader, you're far more engaged because you know that everything has meaning. Have you ever read a story where it's like sometimes they talk about something that seems so important but they never actually go follow through with it? So there comes points where you're like, this is interesting, but will they do anything? So you're kind of half engaged. And with Kubera, you can't do that. Everything is done with intentionality. So you're like, I picked up on this thing. I wonder if this is important. Like, for example, recently, I think that Maruna's Crimson Sunshine of Dawn is going to become a lot more important based on what Raltara said. And I do find the fact that he has to use it in his human form to be significant. I'm not entirely sure why, but it just doesn't feel useless. Like, I picked up on that and I'm kind of hanging on to it. When you make your conversations meaningful, the people who are reading it are going to constantly care because there's always something they can take away from all the different conversations. And I think she's really good at that. And I think she's starting to ruin other stories for me because I don't think they're right with that level of intention. And I'm like, is this important? Should I hold on to this? Do I just dismiss it? So you got to give her credit there. Nishio Ishin is the author of Monogatari, this light novel series. It's my favorite light novel series and my favorite anime. And one thing that he's very good at is making a very meaningless, mundane conversation highly engaging. And this is a part of world building that I think a lot of people do not talk about, and that's the people in the world. A mundane conversation about nothing much actually does a lot to build the world. Because it's living and breathing. Things aren't only happening when our main cast or main character arrives in the area. Everyone is still living their lives, still doing things, talking about something that does not matter, like relationships. Not relationships don't matter, but that's not necessarily central to the plot of like, oh, what's Asha up to? Like, talking about these relationships. And the fact that she has these types of conversations inside in the story of Kubera is highly important for making the world feel truly alive. And one thing I would argue maybe we don't talk about enough is the humor in Kubera, and as a result of the humor and a lot of these kind of more meaningless conversations being so funny, it's very, very engaging. And it's really those three things that I think that she's kind of mastered that makes the art of conversation that she has within her narrative very, very powerful. You care about you kind of hang on words, you hang on conversations. You see the God of Earth Kubera and Ran having a conversation, and you can't take your eyes off of it. I do think that wording, like being sometimes some authors are very flowery with their texts, very extravagant and stuff. I don't necessarily think that constitutes a good or bad conversation, because sometimes I think that can come across as very unnatural. Most people speak pretty informally. So I actually have no problem with stories that kind of use a lot more slang, more so than kind of going in their thesaurus bag and pulling out the longest words they can find. So yeah, I think Currygom is one of the few authors who have mastered the art of conversation. There's different ways of doing it, different ways of it showing out in your narrative, but I think what it does for this story is absolutely brilliant. So I just wanted to bring that to light. Let me know what you think about what I had to say. Anything about her conversation skills, her conversation skills, but her conversation skills throughout the story of Kubera that you think I didn't talk about, or a really good example you have in mind. Share it in the comment section below. You guys have yourselves a mighty fine day. Currygom top 1.
In my drugs, yeah, pour it in my cup, yeah. Sitting in my darkness with my goals, we pouring up. I don't really give a fuck, I don't really ever say, yeah. You tell me that I suck, I tell you get up out my face. You got tears in your eyes, looking like a fool.